I'd like to talk to you today about some of the problems we're having in the world and about some of the good news. It's hard to find, but about some of the good news that's happening in the world and where this is taking us in the future. The problems, they're easy. They're easy to see. They're everywhere. Stress. It is a tremendously stressful world that we are living in. People are they're working long hours, or they're not working at all, they're laid off, or they're worried about being laid off, being unemployed. In most households, both partners are having to work just to make ends meet. There's tremendous stress in today's world. Healthcare. Healthcare in America is a serious, serious problem. Many people don't have health insurance, or if they do, it isn't covering things like it used to. It isn't nearly the coverage that it used to be. Many people who get laid off, who are unemployed, don't have any health care because they simply can't afford the health care. It costs way too much. I just read in the newspaper a little while ago where some emergency rooms, hospitals are having to close their emergency rooms simply because people without medical insurance are going to emergency rooms to get their normal everyday health care needs met. And the hospitals just can't afford it anymore. They can't afford to serve those people for free. So healthcare is a tremendous problem in our world. And across the world, there are healthcare emergencies. Doctors Without Borders are doing the best they can to answer those emergencies, but there are people all around the world who are dying just for the want of a vitamin or a mineral or their daily food allowance. Starvation is happening around the world. Every 4.5 seconds as I speak to you, someone dies of starvation or a starvation-related illness, most of them children. So starvation is a huge issue here in America as well. Speaking of America, homelessness. Homelessness we know is rampant around the world, but even here in America we see the homeless everywhere. We see them standing on the on-ramps and off-ramps of freeways trying to collect some money. We see them sleeping in the parks, sitting in the parks. We see the homeless walking on the sidewalks. We see them everywhere in America. Pollution. Pollution has become a huge problem. Doctors and scientists are starting to discover that the greatest source of illness in the world is pollution, mainly polluted air and polluted water. The pollution comes through the ground, up the ground, and into the water tables, and then into our water source and into our food source, and it's passed up the food chain through the animals and into the humans. The pollution is everywhere. It's destroying our oceans, our beaches, our streams, and our lakes are being destroyed by polluted water. And our children are being dramatically affected by this pollution. Wars and terrorism, we sure know about that, especially with the September 11th airplane bombing of the Twin Towers in New York and the loss of hundreds and hundreds of lives in that tremendous tragedy. We know about that. And now the concern about anthrax happening around the country as well, anthrax poisoning. And we know about areas around the world, many areas around the world, and some pockets in the United States where people simply don't have freedom, where they have a lack of rights, a lack of basic human rights. So there are tremendous problems in today's world. There are also some instances of good news. Now, this good news is not necessarily easy to find. However, some of it is on the national media, the television, the radio, and in the newspapers, but we forget about it after it's happened. And some of these good news items are tremendous, things that no one could have anticipated, amazing, amazing things that have come out of nowhere, especially in the last 5, 10, 15 years. And I'll give you some examples. A man from the Soviet Union named Gorbachev comes over to the United States and talks to President Reagan and says, I'm tired of this arms race. I'm tired of this escalating threat of nuclear war. And they signed an ABM treaty, which was completely unexpected. No one expected that. Then he goes back to the Soviet Union and says there aren't enough local responsibilities, enough local rights, creates glasnost, and the Soviet Union breaks up. It disappears. And now what was the Soviet Union is nothing more than all the individual states are now individual countries. No one could have predicted the breakup and absolute disappearance of the Soviet Union. No one could believe it when it happened. It happened so suddenly. How about the Berlin Wall? The Berlin Wall that has been there as part of the Cold War since World War II, separating East Berlin from West Berlin, friend from friend, family member from family member. Many people have been shot trying to climb over the walls, the barbed wire of that wall, the Berlin Wall. Many people have been killed trying to get over that wall. And then one day, not too long ago, the people got out their picks and their hammers and they took after that wall, and no one stopped them. It was amazing. Nobody could believe it. Jaws dropped as people saw this on the news, where they knocked down parts of that wall. They punched holes in the wall where they could look through. They sat up on top of that wall and celebrated and rejoiced, joining east to west. And that Berlin Wall came down. The will of the people brought that wall down. That was almost a miracle. That was so sudden, so unexpected. Another example of good news happening around the world, South Africa. Nelson Mandela had been in prison for 28 years in South Africa. Most people didn't even know he was still alive. Nelson Mandela said that God told him to write a letter to the president, President de Klerk, asking to be released. Well, Nelson Mandela tells the story. He says he almost laughed because he said, I can't even get the prison warden's attention. How could I get the president's attention? Well, he wrote the letter anyway. President de Klerk got the letter and said after the fact, God told me to set Nelson Mandela free. After 28 years in prison, not only is Nelson Mandela unexpectedly set free from prison, but de Klerk wipes out one of the most awful, prejudicial situations in the history of the world, apartheid, where the minority whites were ruling the majority blacks. Apartheid wiped that out. And not only that, follow this up with Nelson Mandela, a black man is elected president of South Africa. Now that's a miracle. I don't care what you call it. To me, that's a miracle. It came out of nowhere. No one expected it. These are non-religious, unexplained events, amazing events that have happened around the world. Dictators are being thrown out in South America, in the Middle East, in Europe. Dictators in Asia, they're being thrown out. The people are rising up and throwing these guys out of there. And it's amazing how freedom is starting to spread across the world the last several years. As a matter of fact, so much so that Newsweek magazine said freedom is breaking out around the world. They actually said that. Those are non-religious, amazing, unexplained events that have been happening around the world the last several years. There have also been religious or spiritual events that have been happening around the world that no one can explain. Now, these are a little harder to find because the media doesn't quite know what to do with these. So you won't see much of it on the TV, hear about it on the radio, read about it in the newspapers. You have to look hard. Where you find these events are in the little articles in the back of the magazines, little articles in the back of the newspapers, and some reliable news sources like IPS Network, News Network on the internet. You can find some of these stories. And some of these stories, religious, spiritual, unexplained events, which I have done my very best to verify the validity of each one that I'm going to tell you about.